Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
The Department of Veterans Affairs' recent memo on cloud security isn't breaking new ground. It's not even changing policy. The best comparison for the memo that is reminding VA contracting officers and program managers that vendors do not have to have their FedRAMP certification before responding to or submitting proposals for solicitations or requests for information is mythbusting. For more on the why VA thought the memo was necessary to bust FedRAMP myths, Federal News Network's executive editor Jason Miller joins me now. Jason, welcome back.
Thanks, Eric.
So let's start with the memo itself that I mentioned in the outline that was signed out by the principal deputy CIO at VA. What does it contain and what does it say?
I think the big thing about this is it's really clarifying existing policy. And I think over the years, what has happened is, and this is not just at VA, Eric, this is really across government, that this feeling of, well, to bid on something, to before award, the vendor that's providing these cloud services must have gone through FedRAMP certification. And really what Zach Schwartz, who is the principal deputy assistant secretary and deputy CIO, says is that VA contracting officers, program managers shall not, and this is really important, they use the word shall, not must or will, but shall not state or imply that existing FedRAMP certification is required for an offeror to compete or receive an award at VA. And I think this is really key here because what has built up over time, and I compare it, Eric, to barnacles on a boat, right? If you don't chip away those barnacles at the bottom of the boat, they eventually really cause your boat not to really float well. And I think this is one of those barnacles that has really attached to FedRAMP, is that what Zach Schwartz really is saying here in the memo is, if you are bidding on a project, if you are part of the VA infrastructure, you have to have an authority to operate. And we have to give you, award you, you have to prove that you deserve this authority to operate within 60 days. And I think all of that is reminding folks that if you don't have it at the time of RFP, at the time of award, you then have 60 days to prove it, and then we can use you. Now, if they can't meet those requirements, the cybersecurity requirements within 60 days, then they won't get used, but you don't need to have it up front. And I think that is really the big reminder that what VA is doing. And it kind of shook a lot of people. When you look at across the community, people were like, oh, VA is not expecting FedRAMP anymore. And I can tell you that's not true by talking to current and former government officials. They're just saying, and VA has told me this in comments, we're just trying to open the door broader to more companies and ensuring that they still meet the security requirements that we expect them to.
Why did VA think this reminder was necessary? Did they feel they were putting out an unwelcoming vibe to vendors who didn't have FedRAMP certification yet?
A VA spokesperson told me that what they were worried about was there's just too many hurdles for vendors, and they were closing themselves off to these innovative opportunities. So what they're saying now is, okay, we want to maintain rigorous security and authorization standards. We want to ensure we're protecting veterans' data. At the same time, we want to have access to the best commercial technologies and do that in a modern digital way with accelerated delivery. So we're kind of opening that aperture to say, hey, we want you to come bid even if you don't have FedRAMP, and we're no longer going to require you to have FedRAMP up front. Eric, I also talked to a government official who requested anonymity because they didn't get permission to talk to the press, but they were familiar with the VA memo. And this person said, too often, it was just assumed that you had to have that up front. And what was happening is company X, you pick the cloud service provider, we could name 1,000 of them, Eric, would have a version of their software that was FedRAMPed a year or 2 or 3 ago. But since then, their commercial version of that same software has gone through 2 or 3 different iterations. So the government was stuck buying or is stuck buying old technology and not the most modern systems. And what this VA memo is trying to do is open the door to say, hey, company X, we know you have a newer version. Let's look at that newer version. Does it meet our needs? And can you prove to us that it's secure and meet all the requirements under both FedRAMP, but also our authority to operate, which is a lot of it is based on NIST 853, so on and so forth. So I think those are 2 good signs to say, hey, we're not going to buy these second rate, these versions that are behind systems, and we want to have access to the best software available that's in the cloud. And Zach Schwartz in the memo talks about, hey, at a minimum, the vendor's got to provide documentation to support things like security assessment reports, architecture data flow diagrams, assets inventories, vulnerability scans. So I think that, a lot of what he's saying we're going to expect from you meets the FedRAMP standards and requirements.
Talking here with Federal News Network Executive Editor Jason Miller. You mentioned it a little bit with your loud screaming impersonation in your first answer there, but what was the overall reaction to VA's memo in the federal contracting community?
Generally speaking, it's been very positive. In fact, Pete Waterman, the FedRAMP director, wrote on LinkedIn that he loves the memo. Pete's a very out there guy. He loves to kind of celebrate good wins. He talked about in that LinkedIn post that he thought it's really brought forward two key points that the program office has been telling agencies for some time. First of all, he says FedRAMP should not be a wall. You should not have to have it to compete, and you shouldn't artificial limit access to those great tools. In fact, Waterman says in that post on LinkedIn that FedRAMP 20X, which is the new approach to the FedRAMP authorization, is really designed to address a lot of these problems, to get those programs, those services to agencies more quickly. The second thing he said is, and I think this is really important, agencies still have to have proper security plans. They still have to follow the risk management framework. All of this is part of that authority to operate. And just because a vendor says, hey, I'm FedRAMP certified, doesn't mean you still don't have these things you need to do to ensure, yes, now they only meet certifications, but they continually meet those certifications and go above and beyond. So he goes, what VA and other agencies did was they were almost pushing it to the side. Okay, well, the vendor is approved, so therefore I'm good to go. And what Waterman, I think, is writing about in his LinkedIn post is to say, hey, this reiterates that the authority is on the agency to ensure that the vendor is meeting the requirements that they said they met and continue to meet them over time. Eric, I also talked to Bill James, who's a former VA Deputy Assistant Secretary for DevOps in the CIO's office. And he also agreed that this is a good memo. This is a good reminder because having that single gate, that idea of only FedRAMP certified products can get through is not an efficient way and could really impact veterans. At the same time, he zoomed out a little bit and said, listen, this is all about understanding the risk and that risk that comes with any technology. So the CIO has to understand what the risk is. And if something's FedRAMPed or not FedRAMPed, you still have to understand the risk. So he was a big fan of saying, let's make sure that we're protecting veterans' data, protecting veterans and the systems they use outside of whether it's FedRAMPed or not, that discussion.
Is this a VA unique problem, or have other agencies have to deal with this, finding that the myth of needing FedRAMP certification before even submitting a proposal is alive and well with the vendors they work with?
From what I can tell, this is a bigger issue than just VA. VA was the first one maybe to come out with this type of reminder of a memo, but I've been told by different sources that not only is the FedRAMP Program Management Office supporting this idea, but Federal CIO Greg Barbaccia, who is leaving at the end of August, also is a big fan of this memo. And in fact, a source tells me that the Program Management Office at FedRAMP is planning to supply similar draft memos to other agencies to act really as a blueprint for how they should go about reminding vendors, reminding contracting officers, and reminding program managers that FedRAMP should not be a gate that you must get through to bid, to even respond to RFIs, but just part of the broader ecosystem of security. And really, I think that's a good sign, because I think what FedRAMP and Federal CIO Greg Barbaccia and others are saying is, we support FedRAMP. We believe it's important. We believe the security rigor that it brings is really key to ensuring data and systems are protected, but it can't be the end all be all. And it's, if you will, I'll use the old phrase, it's a big tool, but it's not the only tool in the toolbox.
Federal News Network Executive Editor Jason Miller, thank you as always.
Always a pleasure, Eric.
And you can find more of Jason's reporting on this at federalnewsnetwork.com.